It's the centenary of the First World War, and I think it still feels very current. I think, to me, it doesn't feel 100 years ago, and that's because we haven't let it slip away that much. And I think it's important, as it's 100 years ago, that we don't let it. I grew up, my father, who's just up there, took me to the war graves when I was 14 to show me the importance and consequence of war, and I believe that I'm very proud of this film because I think that hopefully it'll attract a young audience who go and see it and are moved by it and realise what this kind of war, this very modern war, did to so many young people.
Tell us a bit about your character and how his experience specifically sort of symbolises what that generation went through. What
it symbolises, I think, is the lost talent that could have been around. We had a whole generation of young men, and what really moved me when doing this was that Roland Leighton was a great writer and a great poet, but he was a teenager. He hadn't developed his skills. He hadn't got to a place where his talent was completely developed, and he was killed. And that was true of millions of people in the First World War, millions and millions. And that, to me, is a great shame. And we could have had a much furthered culture by now if we hadn't have killed that many men. When you have as much literature as I had to study, it requires a lot of attention because you're playing a real character who existed in real life, and you want to do that person's memory a truth. And I had a book this thick full of letters that he'd written. I had a book that was written about him by Vera Brittain, and I had as much as an actor can possibly ask for. And so I read all of it, and I kept it on me at all times when I was doing the film, because why wouldn't you? Otherwise you're doing a falsity to him. I've got I did 3 projects this year as well as Thrones. I'm filming Thrones right now, and actually right now I'm in the process of looking for something else for early next year, and it's an exciting stage. I'm going out to LA on Thursday, and I'm going to try and find something that was as important as this film was to me to continue my career with.
The Bible for us all, really, for the film was Testament of Youth itself, the memoir, which, from Vera's point of view, is you can't get a stronger voice, you can't get a more inspirational voice and a more driven voice. But what was hugely helpful was Letters from a Lost Generation, the book, which is purely their letters, Vera, Victor, Edward and Roland writing to each other, and it was their voices and they spoke to us, and we felt a duty then to take those voices and translate them to the screen. For me in particular, for Victor went through a really, really tough thing. For a start, he wasn't drafted into the war initially because he had poor eyesight. So that was quite shameful for people at that time, for boys who weren't able to get into the war, and being labelled a shirker, and to go through that, and then to eventually get drafted into the war because they had to have all the men they could. He ironically did lose his sight, and that was something then I felt I had to have a certain amount of experience and understand exactly what that meant. So I contacted the Blind Veterans UK, which is a fantastic charity. I since learned, having talked to them, there's a lot of blind people in the UK who aren't availing of their services and should. But they were great to me because they gave me the opportunity to be blind in their centre and to psychologically go through losing your sight. I mean, for me it was only for, I think, 4 or 5 hours, but it gave me that taste of what he went through. And again, as I said, it's only scratching the surface, but the people there really helped me to try and engage with that as truthfully and as deeply as I could. I think one of the things that people will learn from this film, particularly with the characters that are being portrayed, is one of inspiration. I think particularly for young people today, the message of the film is that youth is precious. It's special. It shouldn't be misspent. It should be taken advantage of. The moment is now, and we're so lucky right now to not, in this part of the world in any way, to have the opportunities that we have, to go to do the things that we want to do, to go to university, to have a life, to have a job, to have fun, I guess. what would you do if that was stolen away? What if people today had to do what people back then had to do 100 years ago? How would people react? I think that's one thing that when you see this film, you got to ask yourself that, because these people faced up to that. They lived through it. Some of them didn't. A lot of them didn't. None of our characters did. And so, as an actor preparing for that, it was a big lesson for us to grab life with both hands and live for the now.
I think the First World War is such the stakes are so high. I mean, when I was in my 20s, then my granny was 88. She told me about her brother. When she was 12, he was 17 and he died in the trenches. And he was brilliant and clever and beautiful and talented, and just she adored him. You know, she thought he was a god. And when at age 88, she told me about it and sobbed her heart out. It's never got over it. I think that tells you everything. It's just a huge scar on our national consciousness.
Why do you think Vera's account of this horrible, dark chapter in our history remains so iconic and so resonant?
I think it's a female voice, which is unusual for the period. I mean, there were a lot of the war poets were very strongly voicing their feelings about the war, but hers it's a really anguished cry from a female perspective.
Vera she's an inspiration because she's this wonderful, indomitable, invincible spirit. She goes through so much and she refuses to give up, and she goes through extraordinary loss and all sorts of real traumas of her work on the front. And she could have been very defeated by it, but she wasn't. She kept running in the race. She got up at the end of the war, and she became an activist, really. And instead of just giving up, she became this engaged person and ended up one of the leading pacifists of the 20th century. And at the heart of her work was this amazing book she wrote, Testament of Youth, which was her loving act of remembrance for those she'd lost. She was absolutely determined that we wouldn't forget them. And so she wrote this beautiful book, and here we are, 100 years later, still remembering the boys that she wrote about. And that's a testament, really, to the force of her feeling that she was determined that we shouldn't forget these young men, and that it should be a lesson at all costs, if ever possible, to avoid any man's inhumanity to man. And I suppose, yes, I think although obviously this is very much, everybody knows her as the memoir writer of the First World War, it's an elegy that's not just for the First World War, but for all lost youth in all wars. Well, we did feel very responsible because we know it's a beloved classic and loved by many thousands of readers over generations, so we really took care to distill it as faithfully as we could. But I think Vera's story comes through very clearly. She's got this extraordinarily clear journey from this, she's not spoilt, but very comfortable middle-class young woman who has dreams of Oxford. And then we go through this really quite extreme rites of passage story with her, where she goes from her comfortable home to Oxford, to then becoming a nurse on the front, and then having to return after the war to pick up the pieces of her life. And that kind of that journey of innocence to experience, going through the worst the world has to offer, but still coming out the other end fighting, has a very clear arc to it. So I think it's not a difficult story for people to engage in. Alicia Vikander is just stunning, who plays Vera. She really is the most amazing young actress. And I think people will find her very spellbinding. I know I've watched many, many cuts. I cannot take my eyes off her. She just transmits thoughts and emotions through her face so naturally, and she really captures the life force of Vera, so we're terribly excited about her. And then all the young men, Colin Morgan, Kit Harington, Taron Egerton, Jonathan Bailey, Henry Garrett, who plays Vera's eventual husband, they're all wonderful, very, very, very detailed, delicate actors who've come up with wonderfully emotionally authentic performances for this film.
I got sent the script, I think like most projects, and I went in and met James and Rosie, who produced it, and we sort of talked it through and read through some stuff. The thing about this project, and even before I went, I got Testament of Youth, the memorial, and you start flicking through it and you just go, there's an extraordinary wealth of information which sort of we're spoiled with, I think, and the fact that it was all there in your hand in print, the correspondence between these people, and just, you know, the story in itself of Vera, I think, is all about, you know, the human capacity of endurance, I think, and just how much someone can put up with, and it is relentless. And I'm ashamed to say that the script was the first time I really understood and knew and read about Vera's story, but flicking through, you just go, it is ridiculous how much she endures and that she comes out and she came through and she fought and then she wrote her memoirs is amazing. So I played Geoffrey Thurlow, who's Edward Britton's, Vera's brother's, really good friend, and it's an interesting relationship that he has with Edward, which there's a great affection there, and it's possible that they were lovers, which isn't really, it's not really examined in this film, but it's his relationship with Vera, and he represents a different. There's the four guys that go off to war, and you know, Victor stays back at the front line, Roland goes, Edward goes, Geoffrey's met, and the thing about Geoffrey is that he's diffident, he's shy, he's a pacifist, and so he represents a voice of you know, of that group of men that were, you know, still forced into the front line.
The heart of that group of men is Vera, played wonderfully by Alicia. Can you talk a little bit about her performance and how she's captured the spirit of this iconic figure?
She's extraordinary. I mean, she is extraordinary. I haven't actually seen the film yet, so it's my first time tonight. But even working with her, she's like a young lady of supreme intelligence, and she's super fun to have on set. And we had a great time. But she's just got a beauty about her. You know, some people you meet and she's so generous and warm, and I think bringing that to Vera Britton is going to be something that's really interesting to see, and I can't wait to see it now. It's incredible to be involved in a project that is part of the slate of London Film Festival, because this is where, you know, it's a British film. This is where it was conceived, the idea of doing the film, and yeah, I mean, I'm sort of bamboozled by it. I mean, it's amazing, and yeah, this is the place where it should be told, I think, for the first time.
It's a tremendous honour to be at the London Film Festival, but particularly in the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of the First World War, to be bringing our film about that war to our hometown. This festival is fantastic.
And for people who aren't familiar with Vera's original writing, what is it about her account of this horrible period in human history which makes it so poignant and so timeless?
I think the fact that it's a woman's perspective of war is something we don't see on our screens very often, really. And the fact that she was so deeply involved, obviously, with her brother, but with her fiancé, who was her brother's best friend, it makes it feel very human and very real to us. So it really brings the impact of war home, I think, to a modern audience in a way that's, again, quite unusual. Well, obviously, the characters in the movie are very young. You know, they're all about 20 or 21 when war breaks out, but the actors who inhabit those roles have such a sort of inner maturity as well, and we're able to make that journey through the trauma of war in an incredible way, I think. So yes, I think that combination of youth and inner wisdom that they somehow have made them, you know, perfect for the parts, and hopefully people will see that when they go and see the film.
What are you hoping, I guess particularly a younger audience that aren't familiar with the history and this account, take away from the experience of watching this film?
Well, I hope that they will realise what it was like to go through a war for that generation and the sacrifices they made. And also, I think Vera's ultimate message to young people is, although we live in a very different age, you know, unlike her generation, perhaps we should always remain questioning of the powers that be and not to take anything at face value, and to always question everything we're told, really.
Why do you feel that Vera's story has become so emblematic of what this generation went through, and what are you hoping the next generation now is going to take away from the cinematic experience?
Well, you know, her story is emblematic because it's from the woman's perspective. It's from those who stayed kind of at home and then she went to become a nurse. But, you know, war affects those not just literally with the bayonets. It affects women at home, mothers, children. And I think one of the things that people will take away from it is that, you know what, you have to go out in life and grab what it offers you. It will be tough. You will lose people. You will lose love as well. But you will be a wiser person as a result, and you will find your own voice. You will have the confidence to know who you are as a human being. And I think that's the story that I want people to take away from this film.